It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
Scott has a question. The overarching part of it is, how do I reset my finances and budget? Here's some what's going on, kind of why he's asking this question. Last year, he made $90K with a strict budget. This year, they moved states, bought a house, got an inheritance, bought new cars, started a business, started making about $200K. And now budgeting is hard. It seems like all we do is spend money now. And it's hard to budget now since we have so many one-off expenses and such a big life change over the past year. Mm-hmm. So how would you advise him on resetting and actually maybe sticking to a budget? Or what do you think?
Yeah, this is really interesting, Brian, because a lot of folks, Scott, you had 1,000 things change. You moved states, you had all this stuff. But for most folks, there are unique things that happen in life. We buy our first house, we get married, we have kids, we change jobs, and it's really hard to discern what's normal spending. You buy a new house, well, then you gotta go get the couch, and you gotta get the lawnmower, and you gotta get all these things that are one-time expenses. It's really, really hard to hone in on that. So what I counsel my clients to do when they go through big life changes like this, whether it be children or houses or changing jobs or changes in income, is the first thing I want you to do is track. You got to track for a few months where your money's going. You can't decide where you ought to be sending it unless you kind of have an idea of where it is going right now. So what I would do is I would track over a number of couple months, 2, 3, 4 months, and just see where it's going. And there's tons of financial tools out there, tons of free resources and apps that you can use that will aggregate all your transactions, and then you can kind of group them. And then you got to kind of group them into, all right, what are the consistent, ongoing, regular things? That's gym membership, utilities, mortgage, all that kind of stuff. And then what are the one-off things that aren't going to be repeated, like a lawnmower, a couch, or whatever the thing is. And you got to kind of figure out what is my realistic lifestyle, and then what is the unrealistic part that's just part of this change. Hey, I'm spending a lot of money on diapers right now, and that's going to be for a season, but perhaps that's not going to stay that way moving into the future. And then once you have an idea of what your one-off expenses are, and then your consistent expenses are, that's where you have to kind of go through and start chiseling. Oh man, we're going to Starbucks a lot. Maybe I need to cut that back. Or, oh wow, do we really need the Amazon membership and the Disney Plus and the Netflix and the YouTube TV and you can start figuring out, okay, how do I bring this down? Here's where I would be encouraged. You said that your income previously was $90,000 a year. You have proven to yourself that you can live off of $90,000 a year. That's something that you have already stated is a possibility inside of your family situation. Before I let my lifestyle expand so much of this new $200,000 a year income, I would try to stick with where that $90,000 number was and let my lifestyle creep slowly, not rapidly.
Well, I think you were hitting all around this. There's a key thing to differentiate here: income versus expenses. Mm-hmm. You have to track your expenses. Look, we talked about it. If you go back to some of our old content, I even try to get you out of budgeting as much as possible. But until you build that muscle memory of your money is just automated and going in the right buckets for you, you've got to track the data to know what your actual expenses are. So make sure you're not skipping that, because a lot of what I heard Scott talk about was income variability. Mm-hmm. And that income variability is very different than expense variability. So you better track what your expenses are so you can make sure you're still doing that, spending less than you make, and you're within good strategies of your income versus your expenses and all those rules that we love to share on our show. But there are some things, because it made me think of what we experience is that there's a lot of variability in our income as well. And it's not uncommon with our clients, successful clients, that you might have income streams from different places, and there's different seasonalities to it, and there's even different years on how it comes in. You'll say, well, what do I do with expenses that I know are going to be consistently giving? Mm-hmm. I mean, what do you do about giving when your income is all over the place because maybe you had a good year last year and then this year's down? So what I have found is that I have some strategies for income variability. Is first of all, if your income is consistently going up, but it's not guaranteed, then you can always use last year's tax return. Like I know I've used that as a tool for me with my giving accounts is I will look at last year's tax return and then I keep that method going forward. For others, for other categories where maybe your income, because you just said your income went from 90,000 to 200,000, that's a tremendous amount of variability. So I always talk about 3-year averaging. When you have a career trajectory or income trajectory that's doing huge jumps, you could also now levelize that to a degree by taking 3-year averages so that you get something that's a little more consistent to then compare it to your budgeted expenses to find out if this is a struggle that you have because maybe your income dropped 25% last year. These things all work, but don't mishear us. You've got to do the tracking of your expenses because when we talk about financial independence, one of the first things we're dealing with when we're talking to prospects or people is we fine-tune what are you actually spending your money? Because that's when we talk about financial independence is how do we replace what your actual cost of life is? And that is an expense number. That's not an income number. So you have to do the tracking. You have to do the homework because one of the worst things that happens is people say, yeah, I make $300,000 a year. And be like, what do you spend? Oh, I don't know.
I don't know.
So that's not a good place to be because you only get a good result with your financial plan if you know the data points that are actually going into the navigation of that. So hopefully, Scott, we gave you some good, tremendous tools there to help you navigate that variability, but put in the work, know what your expenses are, and look, there's nothing wrong. Because we experience this all the time when clients move or maybe they have a different marital structure or there's all kind of life changes that happen. It's okay if life is chaotic for an 18-month period or so and you have a period of adjustment. That's okay. Just make sure you always feel that pressure or you have that voice in the back of your head that says, hey, if I feel like I'm out of sorts here, let's just make sure this is a short-term thing and not a long-term thing.